And for a time, the process continued 2005 to 2008, even when the Ukrainian reformers in power engaged in some pretty brutal spats. Real and abating business ties with the West were still explored and established. As it could be predicted, however, Ukraine's northern neighbor did not take well to all the Euro-Atlantic terms, especially economic. In what it, in its 19th century perspective of the world, perceived to be its backyard, its particular sphere of influence, it waited for an opportune moment to strike back. And it did. The opportune moment was the Bucharest summit in 2008, when Vladimir Putin managed to convince the West to withhold NATO map from Ukraine and Georgia. That move in the political or security sphere was then followed by a series of very clear economic moves, some disguised as political. Putin, while already playing with gas prices for Ukraine as early as 2006, declared a gas war in 2009, forcing Yushchenko's squabbling reformist government to sign an onerous gas deal. The deal was so deadly that it caused the collapse of the reformist coalition in 2010 and the ascendancy of an endemically corrupt Yanukovych regime, when even Yanukovych in 2013 signaled some desire to straighten ties with the EU with a free trade agreement. Putin declared, if you remember, a trade war. Left in the untenable position, Yanu the corrupt yielded swiftly to Vlad and instantly sparked a follow-up to the Orange Revolution, the more massive revolution of dignity. When the revolution of dignity brought to power reformers even more dedicated to the Euro-Atlantic future for Ukraine than the reforming predecessors, Putin instantly doubled down and essentially went to war with Ukraine, if only in hybrid form, taking large swaths of Ukraine's industrial heartland in the east, hoping to cripple Ukraine's economy permanently. During all of this, the Ukraine-US Business Networking Series, as did other mature nation statehood spawn series, continued to operate with the faith that sooner or later, Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic ambitions would prevail, a faith certainly reconfirmed with the Revolution of Dignity and subsequent constitutional commitment to seek EU and NATO membership. During the corrupt Yanu regime period, the BNS forums concentrated on areas of economic activity where actual progress was being achieved, agriculture and the boom in the infrastructure projects in Western Ukraine. During the hybrid warfare period, with the East and South's classic industrial base under threat or actually under occupation, the business series highlighted UA's enormous progress in high tech, especially in cyber technology in its three big city brain hubs, Kharkiv, Kyiv, and Lviv. And now we come to our forum, or its origins. As the organizers were getting ready to set up a forum in 2022, after a COVID-induced hiatus of nearly 3 years, Vlad the Bad pulled the final trigger against Ukraine. He decided that for an all-out war with Ukraine, an invasion on 5 fronts with the intent of capturing the capital and imposing his will. Given that the war might engulf all of Ukraine, the organizers were clearly faced with a dilemma and decided to postpone the April 22 forum. Fortunately, 3 very important things happened as the war progressed. 1, Ukrainians kept winning militarily. 2, the infrastructure, despite incessant beatings, proved bowed but not broken. And 3, the Ukrainian nation very clearly, with its resilience and resourcefulness, reconfirmed both its Euro-Atlantic expectations and its Euro-Atlantic credentials. If Ukraine survived the trauma, it clearly wanted to look like the euphemistic West. So the organizers committed to a BNS forum in the spring of 2023, but here they faced another quandary. All the previous business conferences were dedicated to the underlying Look West theme, but they had only to deal with the makeovers of Soviet era or robber baron early post-Soviet era enterprises. In the new circumstances, the organizers were dealing with a business environment in the aftermath of a devastating war. If so, all agreed that a Marshall Plan-like approach, and here I bow to our chief economist, Ms. Diane Francis, she's given us a sort of larger perspective on things. an approach to the issue was needed. Once the major point was agreed upon, that we needed a larger overview, two schools of thought emerged with regard to tactics. One school favored looking at the 5 industrial sectors that needed to be refitted immediately for all else to work in Ukraine, or were already functioning well enough to take the lead, i.e. 1, infrastructure, 2, agriculture, 3, energy, 4, the military industrial complex, and 5, high tech. The other school favored a more broad-based approach embodied in the 5 questions that appear in the program. The what question: what section of any given industrial sector would be best served to start the reconstruction process? 2, the who question: who, the state, private sector, or civil society should take the lead in the said reconstruction? 3, the how question: how sources might, what sources might be used to seed money for reconstruction? 4, the where question: what area of Ukraine should be prioritized in the said process? And the when question: at what point in time should the rebuilding start? In the end, both schools had appealing aspects, and so in the 2 minutes in 1 approach, we incorporated into the program that you see in the brochure our event. So welcome to our event, and the only thing I have left is to say the rules of the game, the how. And that's very short because it turns out that our brilliant discussion leaders have actually put together their own schedules for how they will be running. The only thing we ask is that you stay within the parameters of what you've been given overall in the on the program, the time schedule, so that we can get all the panels through. And to ensure that we do that, we will have a timekeeper keeping time for the panels. Okay. So with that, I welcome you to our event, and I welcome you to our first session. And to I will ask Adrian Korodnitsky, a very old friend. In fact, I want to say that there are 2 individuals that have stood the test of time in all of this. The first is Adrian, and the second is Herman Birchman. I wish that he had been able to make it here. One from AFPC, and at that time, Adrian was at Freedom House. These 2 have been the kind of wingmen of all of the efforts we've tried for the last 25 years. So Adrian, with that, and with the fact that I'm going to sell your upcoming book on Ukraine, being published by Yale Press, Adrian, I hand this session, a very important session, planning, imagining a takeoff plan, to you and to Tanya and Todd. Okay.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and hello. I cannot see you, Natalia, but I will see you retrospectively. But I'm delighted that you are going to be the key speaker in this session. I want to spend a few minutes just to let everyone know who will be addressing us and why. Well, is essentially the point person. I now see who's like basically we're comfortable. Natalia Shapovalov is serving as the chairman of the Cave School of Economics Institute, which is a major think tank in Ukraine that is doing the core research on sanctions, on strategies to recover resources for the rebuilding of Ukraine, and in documenting the destruction of risks upon Ukraine by Putin's war. At the same time, the Kyiv School of Economics and the Institute are an incubator of thinking about how the transition will be, the post-war transition will occur, and what are the current needs in Ukraine? Because part of the strategy of rebuilding Ukraine is to make sure that there be a foundation strong enough to make a recovery, a quicker recovery possible. So all of these ideas are, all these ideas are being discussed, debated among governments to a certain degree within the business community, to a certain degree within policy. But really, the source of analytic rigor and documentation is coming from the Kiev School of Economics, the KSE Institute. Natalia has had a storied career in analytic work and in research. If you look at the dozens of papers and research reports that the KSE Institute has published, or that US-Ukrainian have published, her hand is in them, and her leadership and knowledge are crucial to their implementation. So we're really delighted to have her here. I just want to say a few words as a kind of scene setting. There have been a number of conferences, and there will continue to be a number of conferences, roundtables, and discussions about Ukraine's current economic needs at a time of war, where investment, rebuilding are also a part of the effort for the country to survive and withstand Russian aggression. Clearly, the state is repairing its energy grid, it's repairing, it's thinking about how to help exporters, so that there is an ongoing economy. That is clearly a part of the discussion. There is a now for the when that Peter has. But there is also a lot of thinking that is going on, which I believe conferences, a recent conference last week in London on energy related issues. The Ukraine Recovery Conference, which used to be called the Ukraine Reform Conference. The conference is done at the ministerial level that were launched in Britain 6 or 7 years ago, and will be back in Britain in June, where world leaders will come. There was one in Toronto, there was one in Scandinavian countries, where they moved around. There will be one in June, where all these issues are going to be addressed. But most importantly, I would say, is that Natalia Shapoval's work and the work of the Kiev School of Economics and the KSE Institute are crucial to this process as a source of input. The close cooperation between the Kiev School of Economics and the Office of the President and the various ministries, the Cabinet of the Prime Minister's Office, the Ministry of the Economy, ministries of regional and Reconstruction, all these ministries that are tasked with thinking are turning to the Kiev School of Economics Institute and turning to the work that Natalia and her colleagues have been doing on a cross-border basis. This isn't purely a group of Ukrainian scholars working. This is a group of analysts across borders. So I think we're going to get some of the best and clearest thinking to shape the basis for our further discussions. But I do want to say that all of these conferences are an expression of hope and victory, of hope in the fact that Ukraine will prevail, that this madness, this destruction, and this horror that has occurred will be resolved. And so, in general, economic conferences tend to be upbeat, where you're projecting the positives about a country. This is a country before, this is a country which terrible things have been done. And I think it's important to understand, what will need to be done to help the country recover, and not to be cynical about it, but what kind of opportunities this creates to reshape Ukraine in a way that benefits its people, that moves it away from that kind of stranglehold that kind of entrenched economic power have over it, and creates a more dynamic post-war. Just a final couple of things. Natalia will, I'm sure, tell us about the agenda, meaning the work that she has done on documenting all of the destruction and so on, and about the priority needs. But there are two numbers. There's the number that Natalia's Institute and the Ukrainian government have put forward of the damage, the 1.5 million, I think, I'm trying to remember, about 1 million households that have been destroyed, meaning apartments, buildings, etc., residential, the massive scale of destruction of infrastructure, the massive scale of destruction of schools and health facilities. It is, to go on that website and read that report, it is a chronicle intense horror and war crimes. I would say a case for genocide, and certainly a case for reparations, which is another thing that the Institute is doing. But it is also a place where we can see where the rebuilding has to occur. There was a recent report, in addition to the March report that the Institute issued by the World Bank in conjunction with the Ukrainian government and experts, that estimated that the total recovery costs will be in the order of up to $400 billion. That is stretched out over a period of years. It includes the social costs of reintegrating the internally and externally displaced. It also is factoring in that this is not all going to be done in a year or two, but it's factoring in the cost of inflation and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, that number is a huge number. But ironically, that number is about the equal number of the assets of Russia that are held in Western banks. So there is a pathway, even with that huge number out there, to think about how, to make sure that what we will be discussing, what we are discussing, is not just a matter of hope and dreaming and so on, but that there are bases. We also see in the level of support that has been given to Ukraine to sustain its economy, the $100 billion or so that has been injected into the economy and pledged to be injected into the economy, that there is a commitment from the West to help Ukraine win the war, survive as a society, survive as a functioning state, even if we're not, and open the door to rebuild. So I'll leave it at that and turn it to the real, the big expert in the room. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this forum. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adrian. This was really warm welcoming. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me and for having this important discussion. So although the war is ongoing, however, there is no chance for Ukraine not to recover like right now. As Adrian started already, the damages caused by the war are huge. So there are at least $143 billion of the direct infrastructure damages. And indeed, inside of this number, most of the amount comes from the housing, residential buildings, which is more than 153,000 of houses, either individual family houses or big block houses. So this is really huge. This is more than 7% of all Ukrainian housing stock. And these are losses not just of brick and mortar, but also the losses for people who don't have where to live right now, basically. And this, the social infrastructure, the business losses are huge because of the Russian aggression. Ukrainian agricultural sector is really blocked not only in the ports, but also on the fields. The Kharkiv, Kherson regions that were deoccupied, in most places farmers cannot farm properly because of the mines problem. This is a huge issue for Ukraine because agro is a big contributor to the Ukrainian current account and to the economy in general, to jobs of people. So there are estimates that 30% of Ukrainian land are at risk of mines. This is very high level kind of number. However, even estimating precisely like what's actually mined is really a huge, difficult and time intensive exercise. And Ukrainian farmers frequently don't have this time. They have to farm like now. It's already spring, it's already late, and some of them are trying to plant whatever they can even late. The metallurgical sector is really hit very hard, and a lot of capacities of the metallurgical sector remain on the occupied territories. We lost more than 70% of Ukrainian exports of metals and ore. This is extremely difficult. Of course, there are a lot of factories, plants on the occupied territories, on recently deoccupied territories across the whole country that were damaged. We estimate that there are around 100 big factories that were damaged or destroyed, and this is around $11 billion. These are only quite big enterprises that were damaged by Russians. And of course, this is reflected in the economy. This is reflected in the budget of Ukraine, in the exports. And that is part of the reason why Ukrainian economy lost 30% of GDP last year. So this loss comes from all these damages, also from the people who had to leave the country, had to migrate. There are different estimates between 3 and 8 million people of Ukrainian refugees in Europe. So we estimate that it's probably around 5 million people abroad. Another 5 million are internally displaced. So this is a huge loss of the labor force. So basically, when we are coming closer to thinking like how recovery for Ukraine might look like, we see first these big industries at big risk, like agriculture and metallurgical sector. Agriculture probably will revive when we solve mining problem and ports problem. However, with metallurgy, it will not be that easy. The metallurgical plants will need to be, constructed from the scratch and already according to new technologies. But we also will be in the situation where Ukraine has approximately 2 times less of the labor force than before the war, and 2 times higher budget needs to finance social expenditures and to finance military expenditures, because even when the war stops, like whatever will be the context of that, in any case, the military expenditures are with Ukrainian budget will be there for a long time. So there are 2 sides of this. One is that it's a big part of the budget. Right now, it's 43% of the budget. After the war, it's going to be, a similar amount, maybe different percent, but it will be huge. But another side of this is that this is military tech, defense, that might be a big and growing industry for Ukraine that also can be a substantial part of the economy. So this is a kind of a setup that Ukraine gonna have to solve like from the macro perspective. Not enough people, like approximately half of the pre-war labor force before the refugees gonna come back, and almost twice as large budget for all social and military expenditures. That would be very hard to balance that. So it's easy to predict that for some time Ukraine gonna need kind of support. I hope, as Adrian mentioned, that it's not gonna be support, but it's gonna be actually Russia compensating Ukrainian for the damage they imposed on Ukraine, on the private property of people when they violated human rights of people. But in any case, it will be a big deficit that would need financing. So Ukrainian economic recovery strategy is basically about 2 things. One is more, brick and mortar stuff, like in the World Bank report, basically what has been destroyed from the infrastructure should be recovered to some extent. But then this is also a more soft recovery, the initiatives and reforms that would bring investment to Ukraine, but also that would bring the refugees, migrants, and maybe labor force from other countries also to Ukraine to contribute. And eventually, Ukraine gonna need to, make really a lot of reforms to make these investment projects possible, so that the economy can generate more taxes, basically. And this poses a question on how Ukrainian economy should look like, and requires some, thinking in advance. Recovery already going on. By now, Ukraine recovered around 80 bridges. This is not like everything that Ukraine recovered, but already 80 bridges while the war is going on. But also just yesterday, the president and prime minister announced that Ukraine gonna run 6 pilot recovery projects in the villages and small cities in Kherson, in Kharkiv, in Kiev, Chernihiv region. So mostly on the occupied territories that were heavily affected by the war. So that's gonna be actual pilots. And then there are multiple, individual initiatives, volunteers, people on their own, businesses who are doing some kind of recovery already now. A lot of what was damaged is already recovered in some form, but of course not all. Adrian, I'm gonna stop here, and maybe you'll direct me a little bit with the questions for what might be more relevant for this discussion.
Starting with, I have a couple of questions, and then we will take some from our colleagues around the table. The first is, in your report, I'm struck by the regionalization of this destruction. It's one of the ironies of Putin's war effort that it is in what was traditionally known as Russian-speaking Ukraine and Russia-friendly Ukraine that the overwhelming amount of destruction is there. I was looking at your statistics, so out of this 150 billion, it's like 20%, 25% is from Donetsk Oblast, and 12 or 13% is from Luhansk, and surprisingly as well, roughly 20% is from the Kharkiv region. Could you talk a little bit about it? Obviously, I was struck as we know that there were battles going on in Kharkiv, but they didn't seem to be on the scale of what your findings show. Can you tell us about how the thinking about the regional rebuilding of Ukraine is going on? What kind of discussions are there? Is the commitment of the government that much of this population will eventually return to regions which have lost their capacity to sustain them, or will Ukraine not change its borders, but in a sense, will there be a population shift towards the areas that are not? I mean, it's a terrible thing to talk about, but can you give us some guidance or your thinking on the regionalization of this issue and the challenge of this issue?
Yeah, these are very deep questions, and I was also really struck by that most Russian-speaking regions are hit the most, actually, where people had more, in principle, any kind of support to Russia. But that's exactly the case, and I would say that there is some asymmetry in how reported Kyiv kind of damages versus Kharkiv damages. And it's sometimes we don't feel it from the news as much, but the scale is very big. We've been over the last several weeks to some of these occupied territories. Most of them are more or less kind of safe to come right now. However, they face really huge challenges. Both Kharkiv, the occupied Kherson, even Kherson city, they face a lot of shelling from Russia, and it's really hard for them to recover any kind of business or economic activity, very hard with education. However, people are there despite the fact that many left, but a lot of people still stay there, live there. They rely a lot on the humanitarian support. But also some businesses start, recover. Hospitals work there despite the fact that there is a lot of shelling. We've been to, for example, once the village that gonna be recovered. It's in this program. It's between Nikolaev and Kherson on the south of Ukraine, and all 2,000 houses of this village were damaged or destroyed. Like there are only 3 that we could count that are not destroyed. And despite this fact, 400 people came back to live there without, houses, without anything. So why I'm saying this to your question is because in theory, there might be, a strategy of, like it was with Chernobyl. I think at the beginning of the conference, we talked a little bit on Chernobyl, but there was a strategy, to take people from affected areas and transport them to somewhere else. And here with recovery, it doesn't seem to be feasible. So unless it's something like Mariupol, that is like there is no Mariupol anymore. If it's even like this fully destroyed village, people get back there. And there is no chance that they will not. And it seems that politically, the government, the president, they respect this right of people to live on their ground. And I think this is more or less the way Ukraine is going right now. So the first priority in the regions, in the occupied territories that are at the same time the most damaged, is to take care of the places in the most need. And there is respect to the fact that people do want to live even in very hardly damaged areas, very difficult to repair. So the first priority, I would say, is actually these places where there's not enough access to basic needs like electricity, heating, light, water, like the roof in the houses. And this kind of solving the needs of these people, I think gonna be one of the priorities. And then a big priority, of course, is everything in the energy sector, because we will face the next winter. This is my observation. Of course, I think we are moving in pilots, and Ukraine sees what works and trying then to extrapolate it. But the situations in every village is so different that there is no, one solution that you can just impose.
Thank you. I wanted to ask one question about your. Maybe I think it would be helpful. Your people representing a range of companies and interests here around this table. You could say something before we turn to a couple of questions about the work of your institute, the ongoing work of your institute, and the kind of partnerships that you have with government and the private sector to produce data and so on that may be helpful to people as they are, in other words, I want this to be productive for you and for the institute, and maybe for you to say just a few words about the range of research that you were doing, both for the government, but also for the broader economy.
Thank you, Adrian. So indeed, we focus a lot on sanctions, something that we can do to help our military to win the war. But in terms of economy and recovery, we do follow the damages on the monthly basis. We try to get as much information from businesses as we can to understand how to recover then the economy. We do this assessment of damages not only analytically, but also like on case-by-case basis, making footages from drones and analyzing it with AI, basically, to have a more detailed case-by-case data of the damages. We also do recovery strategies, sectoral strategies, what could be an approach for agriculture, for energy, what Ukraine can have as investment projects in the future to inform the recovery plans of the government. But we also go to these small villages in the occupied territories and try to make up our mind how to actually recover these cities and villages, not just in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of labor force, like jobs, community, how to make this community alive again. We monitor the needs, access to basic needs in these territories that are being kind of considered for recovery or deoccupied. And in general, we are trying to collect data that policymakers then can use for informing this prioritization of recovery of communities.
One last part of your work was a paper that you contributed to called Financing Ukraine's Victory, which was an attempt to assess what the fiscal needs of the state and the economy were to sustain some kind of a state coherence and monetary stability, because the failure and the dysfunction of the state is also a war against Putin's. And several of the people at this table are not just business people, but people from the policy community who are trying to advocate not only military assistance to Ukraine, but also this more comprehensive approach to helping Ukraine sustain itself at a time of war. Can you just say briefly something about your work in that area?
Yeah, thank you. We are trying to advocate for partners engaging with Ukraine on a systemic level. We write papers with CPR or on our own, as Adrian cited, about how the infrastructure and engagement of partner countries can look like. In our last paper, the estimate was that Ukraine needs between $50 and $60 billion this year to actually finance the victory, not just the budget. And I guess that kind of amount of money that Ukraine gonna need on the annual basis for some times in the form of recovery funds, but also funds for the budget.
Thank you. Any questions from? There's a Horace.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Natalia. Дуже дякую, що ви знайшли час нам зустрітися.
No, it's just, yes.
You'll need to hear it.
You can help me with no, yeah. Different for my day.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Natalia, for being available. Two very quick questions. Research and data is very important in the financial community, which is where I focus my efforts. How do we access some of these reports? Because without data, it's not documented. KSC is a very credible organization. I myself have lectured there years and years ago. And so where can we access this data and information? In number one, because I looked at the website and I can't find statistics and data. And if it's on a purchase basis, that's fine. But more importantly, the question that I have is there's been a lot of discussion about increasing sanctions on Russia and that it's going to devastate the global economy given the inflationary pressures, etc. What is KSC's opinion on that? And where is there a white paper that we can use to defend a policy against that point of view in the US?
Thank you for this question. I think we can make some joint newsletter after this with Adrian about Ukraine recovery needs and relevant data on this, given that organizers of this wonderful event will understand even better what kind of needs and questions are of interest for the audience here. So thank you for this insight. And of course, like the caveat here that there is really a lot of data that we have to create because all the statistics or most of the statistics doesn't work during the wartime. So there is a lot that we are creating and some of this we don't publish. So again, we will coordinate with Adrian how to approach it best to share the materials with the audience. And on the second question on Russia, I'm also part of the Yermak McFall group on Russian sanctions. Just yesterday, we published an action plan for 2.0, with all the proposals of our group and also backed by the ideas of the Ukrainian government and Office of President. So there is a lot of alignment on what is there. And I would say that the major proposals that we have there are again about the energy, about enforcement, and about urgency. So the sanctions, so, you know, Russians will find all kind of ways to circumvent sanctions if we just give them enough time for this. And given their expertise in illicit trade and all kind of shady stuff, this is, you know, a very strong enemy. So if we just wait for too long with enforcement of energy sanctions, all the oil will flee at the same volume with the same export revenues for Russia. So the speed is very critical, and I think we really advocate for this. And we published also today a new report with evidence on effectiveness of oil sanctions, where we see that there are loopholes and there is an importance to enforce them more. Yeah, I would love to also follow up with you, with Adrian, on this question after the event.
So in short, your research and analysis is on demand, and you are, the KSC research and analysis is feeding the Vermont Apollo Institute. Is that correct?
So we are a think tank that does a lot of work for the government, and we don't publish some of the work that we do for the government, but the rest that we advocate for, like with sanctions or damages, it's on our website. Maybe we have to reform our website if you couldn't find it, but a lot of these things that we advocate for are just like free, and basically everything that is not confidential, we are happy to share.
I just want to say that you should click on the KSC Institute. The more of the data is there rather than the broader website. Maybe you should have a separate brand, much more distinct for the KSC, but that'll create problems in your household, I'm sure. So I'm not going to recommend that. Any more questions? Please, over here. So this will have to be the last question.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Nice to meet you. I have actually two questions regarding the topics of our conference. You're saying that you're developing strategies for recovery of Ukraine. So what are the main pillars on which recovery from point of view of your institute have to go on, especially in energy and agricultural sector?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I can speak here on my behalf, although on many of these discussions there are, you know, people from government and other think tanks. So the key pillars of recovery, first is I think it's really critical to have Russian assets for compensations, because the amounts of this recovery needs are huge. So to recover Ukraine, you know, to where we have been, and for Ukraine to become a proper EU member, it would take like $500–700 billion. So I think this is a critical part. Second, it's really critical to have reform that would ensure the investors and foreign governance in transparency and accountability, and that Ukraine tackled corruption issue. And I think there is a common understanding on every level that there should be reforms of the court system, the enforcement of property rights, anti-monopoly legislation, and stronger anti-monopoly committee, and basically all kind of deregulation for investors to be able to make their projects quickly and smoothly in Ukraine. So there is no doubt that these are key pillars. So Ukraine doesn't have any oligarch problem anywhere around anymore. And then in terms of industries, Ukraine, like the way we approach it, and it also was in Lugano when in Switzerland on the donor conference approximately 1 year ago, Ukraine was presenting the recovery plan. We also were contributing to that, and it doesn't change. So the energy transition is a critical opportunity for Ukraine, given that the European Green Deal and transition to new green sources, there will be new opportunities for Ukraine to contribute also to transformation of our energy system, but also contribute to the energy mix in Europe in terms of more green energy, solar, wind, hydrogen, and to become independent, fully dependent from Russian gas and remove all the coal that we can. And this basically creates a lot of business opportunities or like investment needs if this path goes forward for all kind of smaller and medium businesses to step into the solar energy production, but also for bigger companies to come possibly into the sectors like wind and hydrogen, but also possibly Ukraine, and we actually believe in that, Ukraine could create a storage infrastructure for hydrogen for Europe as well. And I think among some of the ambitions is to increase exports of Ukraine electricity to Europe and create part of the solution of this green transition for Europe as well. And then it also kind of part of the growth of the energy sector of Ukraine, of green energy sector of Ukraine, should be transformation of current big consumers of coal and old style energy like metallurgy specifically. Ukraine has a lot of iron ore, and historically Ukraine was exporting it as iron ore mostly, and possibly there is a chance to create a better like joint investment projects on the territory of Ukraine closer to the iron ore, and then to export actually green steel that also be fueled by hydrogen, by electricity, and contribute to the energy sector development. What is also discussed, and by Ministry of Energy as well, is that Ukraine might increase its atom nuclear energy production and also contribute to the mix in this way and export more. With agriculture, there is a lot of organic growth of Ukrainian agriculture sector, and more organic growth, if we remove kind of Russia problem, would come from higher productivity. Higher productivity can come from better irrigation systems, because part of territory of Ukraine, like Kherson, like deprived from water, and this kind of simple solutions can really improve Ukrainian productivity. Then there is a potential for Ukraine to localize a little bit more the fertilizers and agrochemistry and other stuff on the ground that would also contribute to it. But eventually, Ukraine would probably need some kind of governmental policies to increase the value added in the agricultural sector. So I will stop here, not to take even more time of the event, and I'm happy to discuss further afterwards.
Thank you so much. Thanks very much. Thank you for fulfilling the task that was set before you, which was to set the table, the context for our ongoing discussions. Thank you above all for the work that you and the Cave School does and your institute does in behalf of Ukraine, and also in behalf of enriching the ability of those of us in the West to understand how we can best help Ukraine in its recovery. So thanks very much, and I'll turn it back to Walter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And yes, we would be very ready to disseminate any material that you think would be capable of being disseminated. Okay, so thank you very much, Anya Talka. That was very comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this event.
Now I move, because I know that we have a very, very interesting first panel. And we're going to be able to move on to the focus session 1, defining the what, who, how, where, and when issues in the infrastructure sector. And I will invite the chair, architect Mr. Popovich, and Mr. Thomas Lang, Tom Austin. I think Professor Cox is online, and special discussant Oleg Medenicha, Deputy Medenicha, if they can come to the dais. And I must say, the one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, because I'm really kind of proud of the folks that we've ended up picking as discussion leaders. I want to say that Nestor Popovich, who now presently serves as the architect, principal architect of CAS AE Design Group in Kia Company, he actually is one of the finest architects the Ukrainian American community has produced. And so I don't know of anybody who could better run this particular section, the section on infrastructure, than our dear friend Nestor. And boy, has he been prepared. I can tell you that all the emails that I received and all the wonderful preparation you did for the session. So it's all yours at this point. I'm actually excited to see how this works. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Walter. With that kind of introduction and the expectation, now you got me scared. In any case, good morning. My name is Nestor Popovich, and it's an honor to serve as the chair of our panel here today. As we try to cover our thoughts on this massive rebuilding of Ukraine, with really a focused view on the subject matter of our session, transportation, communications, and construction sectors. In general, just a very small but significant part of the overall massive and complex reconstruction process in Ukraine. Walter, I promise I'll stay within the time rules here. Let's see if do we have the presentation up?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, can you? Okay. In any case, while covering the general transportation, communications, construction portions, we'll touch on many of the other factors which will play an essential role in this reconstruction process. And if we can have slide 2, please.
It's coming up. And you want everybody on Zoom to watch it as well, correct?
Yes. That's the that cover, page 2, please. No.
So you can see.
I have it. So slide 2, please. Yes. No, it's 3. Yes, thank you. So our Reunite and University of Florida panelists have a 4-phase plan, and they'll provide you with a brief overview to try and capture the subject matter of our subject. It's the what, who, how, where, when, but capture it into a 4-phase, 4-year process timeline. The long range, our goal really today is to convey to the listeners these 4 phases and to address the long-term rebuilding needs for Ukraine to become sustainable, resilient, and functional. Our panelists, Dr. Robert Cox, who's on Zoom today, will speak to that point in further detail. You'll hear in our session our tactical and strategic approach on this. And we're going to be considering the urban and rural areas along with a concentration on a comprehensive platform, beginning with an assessment and feasibility studies throughout what we're going to stress, the educational process. And to the opening statements by Adrian and Natalia Shapovalov, her points and his points were, well, there was the statement on education. This is something we're going to stress. We'll also present the discussion on a very important subject from Reunite on academia and the public-private sector, namely educating the workforce, which, as you all know, was depleted by this disastrous war. And this education of the workforce process must start now. First and foremost, we must remember that it's Ukraine and its government and citizens who will be the decision makers in this process. Our role is to guide and consult them with expertise from the West. We emphasize that it's essential to recognize the need to build a task force comprised of skilled professionals experienced in all the functions required in the rebuilding process, while always respecting the knowledge and experience of the professionals in Ukraine who have built a thriving country until the invasion began. The transfer of the construction management processes from the experience of the West to Ukraine is crucial in this rebuilding process, and we'll emphasize that it comes from the educational sector. Our panel includes subject matter experts, and we'll be hearing from them specifically on suggested processes that are needed to tackle this monumental effort. The conference program has the next 4 panels after ours, covering the what, who, how, where, when of the agro and energy, military, industrial, and high-tech, IT, aerospace sectors. So many of our comments from our panelists might apply to all subjects discussed today. So I'd ask for your patience if you sense some overlapping comments. Our panelists today are Mr. Thomas Lang, founder and executive director of Rebuilding Ukraine Association and president of Lang Development and Consulting. Dr. Robert Cox, who's on Zoom today, director and professor of the M.E. Rinker Senior School of Construction Management, College of Design, Construction and Planning of the Educational Sector, the University of Florida. Mr. Thomas Austin, Trimble Corporation, he's the Ukraine Special Country Director. And we have Ukraine's government administration representative being a stakeholder with financial issues as a crucial part of this discussion. I'll ask Mr. Oleg Medunetcha, member of the Budgetary Committee in the Sumy Oblast Rada of Ukraine, to discuss this topic with Mr. Mykola Hryzubyan, our executive SUR coordinator, as being the translator for Mr. Medunetcha. In 2012 and again in 2014, Mr. Medunetcha was elected to the 7th and 8th session respectfully, and he serves today for the country of Ukraine under that role. Our first panelist is Mr. Thomas Lang of Rebuilding Ukraine Association. As I introduced him just a few minutes ago, I would like to ask him to begin. Thomas.
Thanks, Mr. I think the first person I want to thank is the guy who didn't show up and he asked me to replace him. So I want to thank that fellow. Very much. And I also want to thank you for giving Reunite a platform. Good morning. I'm really grateful to be able to share my hope for Ukraine and briefly explain how I wound up here. And from the start, my passion's been developing and operating heavy highway construction companies and building materials facilities. I've worked on 3 continents over 50 years, developing, managing, consulting to various vertically integrated building materials organizations. Some of my own, some of other people's.
Yeah.
And funny enough, 40 miles west of here in West Orange, New Jersey, a little bit farther than that, like Apacon, New Jersey, is where it all started. And we built major sections of the interstate highway system in New Jersey, runways at Newark Airport. We operated asphalt plants and crushed stone facilities and produced over 1 million tons of asphalt a year, operating I think 3 or 4 paving crews at a time. So 92, I was invited to Ukraine by a gentleman by the name of Boyd Bishop. Some of you might remember that name from the past. Boyd introduced me to some people, and I proceeded on a 2 to 3 month tour of Ukraine. Parts of that tour I won't discuss here, but the experience of analyzing and inspecting the facilities and construction techniques of the early 90s gave me a good background of the construction materials facilities in Ukraine for sure. The most successful part of that tour was when we were at a building materials show in Ukraine, in Lviv. I saw a wonderful woman, and I'm married to Jana. We have 3 great kids, all of them Florida Gators. And I will let Dr. Cox, the next panelist, give you the Gator Nation speak. So, but part of that time, 1992 through 2004, I worked and lived in Warsaw, Poland, and operated a consulting group. And in one of those periods, about 5 or 6 years, we started up a concrete products company in Warsaw, and we supplied many popular, well-known projects. We supplied materials to the American School of Warsaw, the Arcadia Shopping Center, Zloty Teresa, the Norman Foster project at the Metropolitan, and 3 major airports in Warsaw, Lublin, and Krakow. We supplied many of the building materials to some of the structures there. And that's where I get some of my background and lessons in education. We had to spend a great deal of time uptraining architects and engineers and construction managers and contractors how to use new building materials that were missing from that market in the 70s and 60s and 80s as they were developed in the West. And that time, that led me to understand the importance of education. It was critical to develop the systems that needed to be put in place. And what happened was, you saw in the early 90s, and I'll get to the point of how I believe this integrates into Ukraine right now. You saw in the early 90s, the Polish companies and Polish construction managers, they were left out of the early funded projects because they didn't have the expertise how to work for the internationally funded projects. They didn't have the expertise of working with the international companies coming in. So many middle managers that normally would come from the host country, they had to be brought in from the country that was bringing in the construction the contracting company. Took about, I'd say, the better part of 8 to 10 years before you saw the middle managers in Poland operating the businesses, before you saw the Polish companies having the bonding capacity and having the ability to be prime contractors instead of subcontractors. And that, I think, is what needs to happen in Ukraine in an accelerated pace. I'll just backtrack up here a little bit. When the war started, I kept trying to figure out how I could help. And then that's, where we founded the Rebuilding Ukraine Association. And now we've been able to bring together a group of people that have been figuring out how and what needs to happen in Ukraine. How can we help the Ukraine construction industry and construction personnel and companies to accelerate their ability to partake in the internationally funded projects, which are going to happen soon at a greater scale. So that's really the essence of Reunite, and how to initiate education programs for the public and private sector. And by that, we have to bring in the public and private sector of the Western nations. And in our organization, we have 3 of the Ukrainian major universities, one Polish, the Warsaw Polytechnic, and we have the University of Florida, Rinker School of Construction Management as our anchor school for the US. Trying to roll right along here. Yeah, okay, I understand. So that all said, understanding the importance of uptraining both people and companies to be able to be lead contractors and senior managers, that's the goal of Reunite. At the same time, there's 2 other directions we hope to go in, we propose going into, and that's evaluating the existing conditions, and that's bringing in technology, because you can't educate the people into the modern construction management and the modern uses of technology without bringing in the technology at the same time. And I'm going to let Tom Austin talk to that in more detail. He's much more qualified than I am. And Robert Cox will be focusing on the educational aspect. So my goal really is organizing the people and the team, keeping the vision going of how to move forward, and what are the people that we need to bring along with us. I want to just emphasize 2 other quick things. We believe there is the near term, the 0, the day the war ends to year 3. That kind of construction draws upon a different skill set, a different knowledge. It's the people who've been there and done that. The people that have to have quick reaction and the experience of just doing with what is. What are the existing building materials, facilities, and the supply for projects? How do we just move forward so that the longer planning, the projects that happen 3 to 5 years out, those are the ones that are going to need the kids that are going to school today to be to be skilled in sustainability, and lead, and all the new modern communication technologies and infrastructure that needs to go in. So there's sort of two areas for that. And last, I'm going to focus on one thing. My experience in building materials, it evolves as the economy evolves, and it evolves as the demand is there. There's going to be an important decision, I think Ukraine's going to have to make sure. How do you jumpstart and bring in the more advanced building systems without the market being there yet? You might, the perfect example is going to be a pre-stressed concrete panel system. It's the fastest, lowest cost, cheapest way to build high-rise buildings, 5 to 7 stories. But it's also the most expensive construction materials process to put in place. Very capital intensive. So people don't want to invest that kind of 30, 40, $50 million without having the contract to build 40, 50 buildings. And that's the things that's going to have to be thought out. Which building systems can evolve with the economy, and which building systems and methods have to jumpstart and have to have some kind of government, maybe private-public partnership that put in place. And I'm just I'll wrap this up here. I can only tell you that I feel that God's leading me. The people that I have met over the past year, I'm just humbled at the meetings I'm in with the directors of all the universities, the people that I'm meeting here. 1 year ago, more or less this week, we initiated the rebuilding Ukraine, and I'm just amazed at where I'm standing right now. And I just hope that God keeps enabling me a way to keep helping you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Slide 6, please. And our next panelist will be Dr. Robert Cox, Director and Professor of the Rinker School of Construction Management, College of Design, Construction, Planning, Educational Sector, University of Florida. Do we have Dr. Cox on the? Okay.
Is there any way you can go ahead and you can go ahead and go to the slide number 7 on the how. I'll introduce myself and talk about how right away. Understanding our time constraint. Thank you, Nestor. So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for allowing me a couple of minutes to share our vision of Reunite and how the University of Florida sees teaming with the public-private sector as well as academia can actually reach a good conclusion for Ukraine. My prayers go to Ukraine, and I feel very honored to be able to try to position ourselves to help the future. So concentrating on the how, is there any way you can let me see the slide? Concentrating on the how, basically we are looking at targeted funding, and the targeted funding would be through things like USAID. There are some solicitations, there's some unsolicitation proposals that are out there. We're also looking at sponsorships, we're looking for World Bank money, and basically the idea behind all that was generating the right team and pulling the team together that we needed and show that we were functional as a team to then be able to actually go after targeted funds through formal proposals. We've actually got an overall time action plan that's phased, and it's focused on resulting in EU integration. And we also have plans for having strategies for attracting and retaining women, veterans, as well as displaced refugees. And when I heard the number that Natalia shared, when it was 3 to 8 million, you know, that's a workforce just waiting to be upskilled and come back. We know the Ukrainian population is very well educated, but we're going to have to reskill some in order to actually accomplish rebuilding Ukraine. So the idea, as Thomas shared, is it's a comprehensive improvement to the entirety of design, construction, and planning industries in the Ukraine. And I represent the Rinker School of Construction Management at the University of Florida. And we're in the College of Design, Construction, and Planning, which has all the disciplines related to the built environment. And we also have our own sustainability in the built environment and disaster resilience groups as well. The comprehensive improvement will include university level degree programs, professional development programs, craft skills and technical training, as well as community outreach and engagement activities. One of the things that we really want to focus on is understanding what the specific needs are for Ukraine and the local communities. That's why when we ask the question where and when, we're going to need a lot of help. We have an idea, but we're going to need a lot of help in identifying the best practices there. Next slide, please. So the where, like right now, we know that we have geographical locations in Poland and the US that we can use to host events and strategic planning sessions and conferences and the like. And we realize that we have other locations that will come on that are Ukrainian university partner locations, but we need to identify the priorities by the local stakeholders. We realize that there's critical infrastructure needs, as Natalia and Adrian shared earlier, and we understand that you have to have the infrastructure in place in order to actually rebuild parts and pieces of the entirety of Ukraine. So everything from rail to telecommunications to wireless communications, they're critical, especially when you think about trying to offer online educational programs to people who are landlocked in Ukraine. and can't get to a location to where we may be specific to some professional development activities or training programs. So having the infrastructure to support telecommunications and wireless communications will provide that opportunity to millions of people across Ukraine online. Next slide, please. So the win, similar to what Thomas said, the win is really now. We have to come up with an overall plan, a passionate pre-plan, if you will, to actually develop, a phased action plan. I'm going to give you a little bit of idea behind that here in just a minute. But we also need more people to actually help us to accomplish this. So we need more people in our Reunite group, and it's going to include planning and education. And we also know that we have to have technology in place as we rebuild Ukraine, which is why we have Thomas here, or Tom Austin here from Trimble. We also realize that we can put together some certificate programs. Online programs right now would be the quickest, easiest way, and we're trying to follow some of the March 2030 reports on trying to, establish what's readily available and then ramp up as a part of our development of the Reunite and rebuilding Ukraine. Next slide, please. So we've come up with 4 phases over 4 years. And in the first phase, the first 18 months, we want to be able to come about with readily available programs, especially I mentioned online, and basically what we can pull together immediately and offer immediately is what we will focus on. And then we will come up with longer range plans, hopefully through a strategic planning workshop later this summer, to really develop the rollout of these items after we identify all the programs that are readily available for us to offer to Ukraine. Then phase 2, you see that overlap. We really want to concentrate on human capacity building, and that would be like middle level managers, as well as craft skills and technicians, and university type programs. And we're focusing on, resiliency and sustainability as a major point of the future. And of course, these programs are the ones that we would come up with ways to attract and retain women of Ukraine, our returning veterans, to basically like helmets to hard hats types of programs, as well as refugees that are returning back to the Ukraine. So it's important that we come up with ways to benefit those folks with upskilling and certification so that it becomes transferable as we move around the country. So in phase 3, we would have sustained building efforts, rebuilding efforts, and at that point, we've envisioned that we would be helping to prioritize and actually rebuild Ukraine with systematic approaches. We would have probably some of our first graduates from specific programs on rebuilding efforts from Ukraine universities, from Polish universities, from US universities. University of Florida has a pretty large contingent of Ukrainian students, and so we're getting ready to launch a student group here to raise awareness and do student competitions per se to help with coming up with rapid rebuild type of efforts that can help sustain us into the future. And then at the end of this, our goal is that Ukraine is independent in its own actions through this educational process. And in 4 years, our plan is to be partners and help with the needs that are identified beyond the rebuilding effort. Thank you very much. I would like to tell you that in academia, while I am a construction manager, civil engineer, and have built many buildings, as an educator, we build people. And I see our Reunite efforts as rebuilding people, places, communities, and the future of Ukraine through education. And I appreciate any opportunity to help us accomplish that. So thank you very much for your time. The microphone is muted. We still can't hear online.
We are doing what we can to prepare for the reconstruction. So when we think about the what, the first number here is $1 trillion. That's the number that Natalie Jawesko uses. Based on her experience with the reconstruction of Puerto Rico after the hurricane. Her reasoning is that the cost of that, the one-day damage from the hurricane is $80 to $100 billion, and Ukraine is 66 times larger than Puerto Rico. So whether it's $400 billion or $1 trillion, we're talking massive amounts of reconstruction needs. The head of the reconstruction, the Agency for Reconstruction Development stuff, I am recently in Washington, D.C., said that there are over 12,000 projects already in the reconstruction database. We're very encouraged to hear Ukrainian officials from President Zelensky on down talk about not replacing what's been damaged, but taking a thoughtful approach towards prioritizing what should be rebuilt and how. And the fact that people are very interested in a green, sustainable, building a green, sustainable Ukraine, and everyone always talks about transparency at every step of the way. So the good news is, with digital construction technology that's been developed over the years and best practices from around the world, there are a lot of efficiencies to be gained. And there's no better country to take advantage of this than Ukraine with the advanced level of digitization. So we're starting from a very good place. When we think about we do need those advanced digital construction professionals, but there's no better place to get them than these 700,000 demobilized soldiers that are expected after the war. The 6 million or so refugees that are going to be returning. And then Minister Fildorf, the Minister for Digital Transformation, in the redesign of the Ukraine government and the going from 20 ministries to 12, he expects 50,000 government workers to be excess. And that the Ukrainian government is planning for the retraining and the upskilling of these workers. So the human capital is there, and the need for these professions is there. So it's actually really good fit. The economic development part of it. You know, we talked about the term is used Fortress Ukraine, or as Natalia mentioned earlier this morning, that the high level of this defense spending. So the creation of a very robust vibrant economy that's going to be able to afford this defense spending. And that can happen on the basis of the world-class agriculture that Ukraine already has. But there's a lot of gains to be made in getting Ukraine's yield levels up to world-class yield levels. For grain, the Ukraine's yield is about 40% lower than the US or French yields. So if we could improve that infrastructure and improve the systems, then that's many millions of tons of exportable grain that play a very large role in both food security around the world as well as economic security for Ukraine. Let's go to the next slide. So I just wanted to remind everyone about the construction industry in general, and these are issues that are faced everywhere and are going to be faced in Ukraine. So 80% of projects have cost overruns. 20%. The average the average additional time needed to complete a project is 20% of the project time, and the lag of productivity is 29%. So according to McKinsey, the construction industry,
Is that a global stat or?
that's a global stat, yeah. And when you get the slide, that there are some references down at the bottom. But according to McKinsey, the construction industry evolves and improves at a slower rate than the US government improves productivity. So yeah, the McKinsey study shows that $1.9 trillion per year is wasted in construction. So these are challenges that we're trying to overcome everywhere. But when you imagine the scale of what's going to happen in Ukraine, it's unbelievable. And so there's no way to do this except using advanced digital construction. So this is there's a lot of information on this slide, and I'll be happy to talk about it later in detail. But a couple of things I wanted to point out here for Ukraine, especially, is open standards. The government is taking a lot of action now to create the regulatory system needed for finance and for import-export. They need the same thing needs to happen in construction. So a system of standards. So every one of these 12,000 projects, whether it's it's run by a municipality or it's run by the federal government, should answer to the same standards. That there are very good systems now to connect the field to the office, where there's a lot of waste and lack of productivity. Then number 4, again, transparency. When Mustafa Nayyem, the head of the Agency for Reconstruction Development, spoke recently to the American Chamber of Commerce Ukraine, someone asked him, "What about corruption? What about transparency?" And he said, the first hint of corruption, this agency is over. No one's going to give us any more money. So we understand we need this transparency. And when we're looking at managing multiple streams of money and multiple currencies, funding the same project, that there's going to be a very large need for tracking and these projects and this money. So everything that we do needs to be scalable, and Ukraine with the IT infrastructure is ready to help with that. And I lost the slide. Yeah, so we can actually move on to the next slide.
Just a quick
But,
question.
yeah.
You say future digital project delivery, is that theoretical or does this exist anywhere?
This exists in
Singapore?
in
Singapore?
Singapore, Japan, the Nordic countries. We, for instance, the leaders in digital construction, digital asset management of highways, the leader is Norway. And they actually use a Trimble system to do that. We're going to take some Ukrainian infrastructure, Ministry of Infrastructure officials to Norway in September to study that. So the US isn't the leader. We need to admit that. But we are creating a lot of progress. Caltrans is a leader. So this is absolutely achievable. It's in many cases. We have a 3D design technology that the Ministry of Infrastructure in Ukraine actually uses. And they said, we do it all, digital models and everything, but our general contractor, doesn't. So it stops there. So it's an entire ecosystem, and we call it the construction continuum. But the thing is that if you start with digital, you evaluate the buildings that need to be reconstructed digitally. You design this reconstruction digitally, you carry it out digitally. And we have partners, for instance, Microsoft and others where we create these environments. Then you can manage that asset and you can repair it all digitally. And so that's the opportunity that Ukraine has right now. And like I say, there's nobody better set for this than this digitally advanced nation of Ukraine.
Has Trimble engaged the Ukrainian IT companies in this process?
Not really. We've been on an educational kind of mission with the Ministry of Digital Transformation, the Ministry of Infrastructure, the Agency for Reconstruction Development. We've got a couple of projects. Louise Polytechnic put a hardware and software. The partnership with the University of Florida and this Reunite consortium. We've got a partnership with the Ukraine Ministry of Education for some of our design software. So it's a mission of education, and there definitely will be partners locally. We can go to the last hand. Yeah. So yeah, the point is there's a great opportunity now, and there's no way to do it without this. The Ukraine has learned with the DIA app that digital creates transparency. It takes the human factor out of it, and we can do the same thing in construction. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Very insightful. Appreciate your comments. We'll have some questions afterwards. Next slide. 16. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Oleg Medunetsa as part of Ukraine's government, is a stakeholder in our panel with financing issues and anti-corruption matters, being a crucial part of our discussion today. I'll ask Mr. Medunetsa, who's the Chief Budgetary Advisor in the Sumy Oblast Rada of Ukraine, to discuss this topic with Mr. Mykola Jan, our Executive CUS-UR Coordinator, to translate.
Дякую. Ну, найперше, хочу подякувати за запрошення і підтримати тих виступаючих.
Invite and the people who have talked about that aid that has to go to Ukraine has to be strategic, has to be global, and has to be discussed. And it should not be only a discussion of representatives of the Ukrainian government, but also from the business, but also from representatives of associations of local government, especially these areas where the military action is taking place. And this help has to be regional. You have to identify the regionals where this help is going to take. It has to, and those regions where you have military actions have to be the priority, because that's where the deoccupied territories, these are the territories which need the infrastructure invested, because roads and other roads and have been destroyed, and it has to be in, because the main for myself, these histories, this is help to actual businesses, actual sectors of the economy. Yesterday, I had a discussion with a farmer, and he's from the Mykolaiv Oblast, and his farm was destroyed during the war. And in Ukraine last year, and this winter, there were cosmic prices for vegetables. He made a decision to stay in the business, and he went over to the Ternopil Oblast. And I talked to him yesterday when he was planting vegetables. He said, Igor, what can the West help you with, or the government? What do you need to be able to do your work? And he says, Oleg, I need water. In the south where he worked, there was access to canals, to water, and this infrastructure was destroyed. And he took land in the Ternopil Oblast, and he has to find either to make a well, and then he needs to get credit or some sort of grant, because he doesn't know how to do this. He doesn't know how to get water to his crops right now. Another case, this is a real sector of the economy. This is going from Sumy into Western Ukraine. This is the business. This is a unique equipment. And the first thing that they found, this is access to the infrastructure, and they have to connect to the various grids, and this costs a lot of money. And this is where, let's say, a factory goes from one place to another, and here they need help. Because one of the goals of the Ukrainian attacks against Ukraine is to depopulate Ukraine. They want the Ukrainians to leave Ukraine. They want the labor force to leave. They want just Ukraine left with pensioners. And those people who remain here, we need to give them help. It has to be targeted. Those who work there, they have to pay taxes there. They have to create jobs there in Ukraine. Other aspects I wanted to talk about, this is help to our business sector, because the business has probably lost billions of dollars during the Russian attacks against the energy infrastructure. There has to be created a reserve of equipment, of energy equipment that could be possibly, we're talking about transformers, these are towers, these are, because last week there were attacks on the energy infrastructure at fuel depots. So those reserves have to be there. And And if these attacks happen, we have to be ready for that. Another aspect of this help, this is to encourage partners between communities. Ukraine is a country of communities, and we have good practice where local communities with Europe help to local communities, concrete local communities in Ukraine. This is school buses, ambulances, everything that the Russians have destroyed. They destroyed, they've burnt out. And this kind of help is very important. See, so if we look at the whole picture, you have a little bit of here, a little bit of there, and then you get a whole picture of what's going on in Ukraine. And this is the way you can encourage helping Ukraine. Also, it's very important, and it has to be help in a methodology, because the laws which regulate the access to the network, they couldn't do this. We have a case, one construction company, which because of the war, it couldn't play its access to gas utilities. And for 6 months they couldn't work because they couldn't work but the gas company got its money because the laws haven't been changed. So this has to be an important aspect. So there has to be help, methodical help for the Ukrainian government. And the last, with corruption, with which we talked about. I think this help needs to go, that this money doesn't go to the Ukrainian government. I don't want to talk about corruption in Ukraine, and I don't want to say that Ukraine's a corrupt government. I'm saying this because that we don't talk about it. With regard to Ukraine corruption, people use this, politicize this in Ukraine and in the United States, because you have to take the best practices of help, which have their. I took part in one program. This is a program, this is before the war. This is a program by the UN. This is small infrastructure projects. There, the help went to Ukraine, but it didn't go through the Ukrainian government. That organization did its own tenders. It renewed schools, renewed energy infrastructure. They built these, and then they gave the money, and the government got the ready product. And there was no discussion about corruption. And in the end, I want to say that in Ukrainian language, there's a phrase that it's in a business association, the collective West, and the journalists, the local government, which could create that model, which will be effective and which will never have any questions towards. Thank you. Дякую вам, пане Олег.
Ваші слова, які справді є глибокі про фактично, як є сьогодні господарем України. So, Walter, we're on time, we're on schedule, we're following the rules. So in closing, Ukraine's reconstruction requires what we were talking about, a comprehensive approach, focusing on the development of the best future that addresses these broad societal needs of Ukraine. This panel, I want you to just leave today with understanding that this panel just shared one strategy to enable Ukraine to be its best through education and applied technologies. So with that, I thank you for listening, and we'll ask for questions if there are any.
So, go ahead. Дякую за ваші слова, пане Олег. Дуже дякую. So, pre the invasion, and there was a lot of discussion within the business community about a Marshall Plan for Ukraine. Now, there's a war. So, what is the process? You have a 5-year plan.
That you outlined 48 months, right? So let's round this 5 years, once things stabilize, right? The Marshall Plan was a plan that came into existence after Europe, there was peace in Europe. That's not going to happen in Ukraine. It's going to be a continuum, even if Russia is defeated over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. How do you as construction managers live in a world where you rebuild your bomb, you rebuild your bomb? There's no example on the face of the planet where that's possible. So you're facing an Aleppo situation. How do you deal with it?
It's the reality.
Good question.
The time to do.
It's really why we at a nonprofit are focused on education. It's the one thing that can start right now that is the baseline for most everything. And doing the three prongs: education, feasibility analysis, and technology. Those 3 things need to move forward as soon as possible. And and identifying the projects that are critical to the survival of the people. That has to happen first. I mean, that's not going to wait for the redesign of the superhighway system with IT pipes next to it and signs that say 15-minute delay. That's 5, 10, 15 years out. I started in Poland in '92. I was back in Poland 30 years later last month, and I saw what took 32 years to build. And maybe we can hope that it'll take 15 years or 20 years to build in Ukraine. Those first 4 years to us is education, analysis, and identification of projects. And figure out the ones that have to happen right away, and then figure out the ones that have to happen 5, 10 years out. Because infrastructure doesn't happen overnight. It's a long process. But nothing happens. I'll go back to it again. Nothing happens without education, nothing happens without technology, nothing happens without analyzing the situation.
Robert wants to respond. Yeah, I got it. Robert.
Yes, I appreciate the question because I've asked that question many times about especially how early we can start and actually constitute rebuilding Ukraine. But I also want to think philosophically, continuing to build, even though we know that it's threatened, is resilience. I mean, it shows that you're not giving up. You're going to continue to live your life. And of course, I have no idea what it's like to be in Ukraine right now. But if you go back to military operations, U.S. military operations, I had folks that were in the engineering battalions, and basically they rebuilt bridges every day, and the things would get blown up every night. But it was to show that they were not giving up. And so I appreciate the question, and I think really it's all about the timing. And when we reach a point where it's just, the risk analysis part of it, and when we reach a point that we have a high probability that that's not going to happen. But if it does, I think we have to just keep going back.
Yes. And I would just point out that that the Ukrainian government, the federal government, has allocated $1.8 billion already this year for construction. And they are, would like to spend $13.3 billion by the end of this year. And so that's, it's critical needs, it's electricity, heat, roads and bridges. But also, you know, the President Zelensky did a ribbon cutting for an apartment building in Bucha. So there are a lot of projects that are starting right now.
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Thanks for the panel, it's very thoughtful and helpful, and дякую, пане Олег, за ваші слова і допомогу нам розуміти ситуацію. My question on the reconstruction. You have the Ukrainian construction industry that was doing very well prior to the war. A lot of new bills, a lot of housing, a core to the economy. And it seems to me that once reconstruction begins, and as it is beginning, not very systematically, but in the occupied areas, obviously there will be, you know, you got Cubans, you got all the different groups in the regions. Who will be taking, I guess, the first stab at rebuilding housing and infrastructure. And as you mentioned, they are the ones that are lacking the new technology. Now, they no doubt will be applying to, you know, the EBRD, the IFC, DFC, European agencies, etc., for funding on new projects. And it would seem to be useful where there is financing, and take, for example, EBRD projects or anything else. You will recall that in their efforts to modernize the system, they introduced, you know, we won't lend unless you comply with certain environmental standards. We won't lend until you work on a modern systematic accounting base and you use these particular programs, et cetera, to make it work. Perhaps it would be helpful to lobby these agencies as well, that as a cost and as a precondition to funding, that contractors, developers also introduce that technology, and that financing helps make that available, because you're looking at it on the macro, you're at the government level pushing it down, but it's all about the money, and the money's coming in from here. And if useful technology and efficiencies in construction can speed the process and make that particular funding more efficient, then perhaps that's something that you can also lobby to discuss, to introduce all that you discussed immediately at the financing level. It's going to happen soon. It's going to fall.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and we're pushing it both with the U.S. government, so with a bunch of key Congress, you know, representatives and senators, as well as USAID and other funding agencies, but also with the Ukrainian government, who can put these conditions into the tender process. You know, it is based on best practice around the world, but if you want to build, you know, we can save between 30 and 50%, you know, create efficiencies. And when we look at Ukraine's not going to have enough of anything, right? They're not going to have enough money, not enough people, not enough materials, not enough time. So it is critical. But now is the key time to put these rules and regulations in place.
Thank you, Tom. I see the red light going on. In order to follow the rules, one short last question.
Sure, Tom. My name is Paul Chernowski. I'm from the Ukrainian American Freedom Foundation. My question is, you mentioned mining efforts, and I just want to. I'm wondering about your thoughts about how demining fits into the rebuilding of Ukraine. Presently, there's over 160,000 square kilometers of possibly contaminated areas, and that will dramatically impact rebuilding efforts throughout the country. In comparison, according to Political, in 2020, 153 square kilometers were cleared that whole year. The United States has allocated just over $80 million towards demining efforts. But at this rate, it'll take 1,000 years to demine the country. And the political stand on this is that the Marshall Plan won't work without dramatic ramping up of demining efforts in the country. Your comments, Tom?
Can I just ask, I'm sorry to interrupt, my question is with regards to demining, but I was trying to ask, you mentioned as well, are you actually investing in any of the companies that are producing demining equipment in Ukraine? There's not robots right now in Ukraine, so I was curious.
Actually, I was gonna ask that question.
Yeah. I think technology will come.
Yes.
The demand for this is going to drive the technological innovation. And so I think we're going to see a lot of things that we've never seen before in demining. So far, our involvement has been using some of our core technology, helping people make digital maps and databases of minefields. So the Ministry of Defense, my understanding is, has one database. The Ministry of Emergency Situations has another database. They kind of conflict sometimes, or they. The same thing we're trying to do in construction. We're trying to reduce waste and increase communication. And so we've donated, our main partner is Halo Trust. And I was talking to some Halo Trust guys, and I said, well, yeah, how long will it take, to demine? And they said it's a matter of time and, of investment and human resources. They said they've been in, he said, for example, though, we've been in Uganda for 30 years and we've done 10%. And so I think, I was talking to some of our agricultural partners, like Bayer, for instance, and other large seed and agricultural chemical manufacturers, that they're actually investing in their own demining machines for their farms in Ukraine. And one of our large customers is also, that they're going to do their own demining. So I think there's going to be a lot more government funding from the US and the EU. And I think there are going to be a lot of new technologies. Personally, we were presented with one investment opportunity and it didn't really fit. But we do have people, for instance, using drones to monitor ground that's disturbed, that might be a location of a mine. But it is, yeah, an absolutely huge. It's necessary before we do anything else.
Thank you, Tom, for your insight. And with that, I'll close with just a few words, basically, of what we were trying to convey. That is, to build an infrastructure, we need that first infrastructure word as the educational process, to build that infrastructure so that the physical infrastructure can be constructed. Thank you very much for your attention.
Esther, I let it go because this was so brilliantly designed, this session. It's hard to follow the pattern. I thank everyone on the panel. I was inspired by both the digitization issue and the military issue. And I just realized all those guys with military practice of having to do it and redo it and redo it every time it's destroyed, it's redone. I think ours, and the answer was given, your modernization, digitalization plus a military experience of Jesus, okay, it fell down, we'll do it tomorrow again, so that will work for us instead of this. Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much, guys. This was just absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah. It's marked a 5-minute coffee break. I will give a 1-minute coffee break. 1 minute, because this is going to be rigorous. And with a 1-minute coffee break, get your coffee, come back, because we've got another panel equally as impressive. This one. Okay. We go to the bathroom. Yes. For those that have. So you have to